This is an ABC News special report.
And good afternoon, I'm Tom Yamas at ABC News headquarters in New York, and we are interrupting regular programming to bring you breaking news, reports from U.S. Marshals and the governor of Texas that Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia has passed away. He died in his sleep last night after a day of quail hunting outside El Paso, Texas. His death apparently of natural causes. Justice Scalia was the longest-serving justice on the High Court, appointed by President Ronald Reagan back in 1986. ABC's chief foreign correspondent Terry Moran covers the court for us. And Terry, you knew Justice Scalia's presence on the court very well. Talk to us about his legacy.
Tom, Justice Antonin Scalia was just a towering figure on the Supreme Court and in American law through the force of his intellect, but also through the sheer force of his personality. He, for 3 decades, led the conservative movement in American law to roll back the era of liberal activism on the courts. He didn't win much. He did hand down some landmark rulings, but it was in those rulings and even more in his dissents, which could be scathing and sarcastic, but which were loud and clear, that he demonstrated a way forward for conservatives who'd almost given up on the Supreme Court after the Warren era, the era of liberal activism. You couldn't say that there was a Scalia era. He didn't win that much. But there is certainly a Scalia influence, and it runs right through the Supreme Court and American courts in general. He showed the way for conservatives to be on the court, to fight that liberal effort to reinterpret the Constitution in the light of current circumstances. Scalia was the champion of saying the Constitution should mean what it meant for the people who wrote it and ratified it. His loss is just incalculable to the conservative movement in American law and beyond. Because he was such a champion, he became a kind of political figure and a controversial one as well. And yet it also must be said he had a gift for friendship. His closest friend on the Supreme Court, the most liberal justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and he were very, very close. They went to the opera together. They appeared in an opera together in Washington. And more recently, Justice Elena Kagan, an Obama appointee, had been converted to quail hunting by Justice Scalia. He was a character, but more than that, as I say, a towering intellectual and personal figure on that court, dominating in oral argument, clear, scathing, and in some ways really a leader like few other justices have been for the conservatives on the Supreme Court.
And Terry, one of his victories, as you mentioned, one of his few victories was Gore v. Bush in 2000. Talk to me about the arguments there. And this was something he was not afraid to almost boast about at times.
No, he was happy about the outcome of that case which awarded the election to George W. Bush on the basis that the Florida recount was violating the equal protection rights of voters because they were counting ballots in such a variety of ways, if you recall. And it, as you know, was a hugely controversial ruling. And yet Scalia was the kind of guy, I would see him from time to time at events in Washington. He was charming, but he liked to mix it up. He liked a good argument and usually got the better of it.
Terry Moran reporting from Mexico City. Terry's actually covering Pope Francis's visit over there to Mexico City. I want to bring in Jonathan Karl now, our senior White House correspondent. Now, Jonathan, as many across this nation are mourning the loss of Justice Scalia, there is now the question of the vacancy on the Supreme Court. What is the next step? Will President Obama now search for another candidate to bring up to Congress? And does he have enough time to get that person possibly ratified before his presidency ends?
Realistically, I think that's going to be incredibly difficult, Tom. He's got less than a year left. The idea of a confirmation hearing for a lame duck president and facing a Congress controlled by the other party on such a short time frame, I think is going to be nearly impossible. I've spoken to congressional leaders already since this news has hit, and that is virtually what everybody is saying is that the idea of a confirmation, this will almost certainly wait for the next president to appoint Scalia's replacement. And it's interesting, Tom, Scalia was confirmed. He's symbolic in many ways of how divided the court is because of his acerbic dissents and the way he has become such a hero to conservatives. But when he was nominated by Reagan in '86, he was confirmed 98-0. There was not a single vote against him. We are in a different era right now. The idea that a Republican Senate in the last year of President Obama's presidency would confirm a replacement appointed by President Obama seems remote.
Now, Jonathan, you were telling me that recently, as of just a couple months ago, you actually heard him speak, and you were in court a couple of times for arguments while he was currently arguing and speaking, correct?
Yeah, ironically, he spoke at my daughter's high school graduation just this past spring, and he I was in the courtroom for the two landmark decisions that came down, one on the Obamacare decision and the other on gay marriage, both of which went the opposite way of what Scalia wanted. And his voice in that courtroom, he could be funny, he could be biting, he was incredibly intimidating to opposition counsel coming before him with his rapid-fire questions, and of course his decisions, as Terry mentioned. He just his turn of phrase. And now, I'm sure you see this, Tom, when you're out on the campaign trail. You ask any Republican candidate for president who they would put on the Supreme Court, what kind of a justice they would like to see on the Supreme Court, and the answer is always somebody like Justice Scalia, or somebody like Justice Scalia or Thomas or Alito. But Scalia is always the first name mentioned. He is, the ideal Supreme Court justice for the conservative Republicans, and yet another reason that the idea that Republicans in the Senate would allow President Obama to replace Scalia on the court just seems quite remote. But yeah, a powerful voice, a rather, for as conservative he was and as acerbic and as cutting as he could be, also could be an incredibly funny guy in his humor.
And on your earlier point, Senator Ted Cruz out with a statement calling Justice Scalia one of the greatest justices in history. Jonathan, thank you so much. Once again, we've been reporting Justice Antonin Scalia has died of natural causes at the age of 79. He leaves behind his wife, Maureen, and 9 children and their families. We'll be covering this completely on World News Tonight coming up. We want to return now to regular programming. I'm Tom Yamas. We'll have full coverage coming up on World News Tonight. And, of course, the latest anytime.
This has been a special
abc.com.
report from ABC News.